Experiment time. Today we're going to test different types of agitation during bulk fermentation. Regular stretch and folds, one-handed stretch and folds, and coil folds. Does it even make a difference? Hi, I'm Sune, and I'm a food geek. Today we're going to experiment with different types of agitation during bulk fermentation of sourdough bread. Stretch and fold is probably the most common one. Personally, I've adopted a one-handed version of it, which I'd also like to test. Kristin from Foolproof Baking seems to have had a big hand in popularizing coil folds, probably because she bakes such beautiful bread. I've left a link in the description for her Instagram. So I want to test if there's any difference in using these three techniques. And what if you don't do anything? I mean, if you do a proper autolyse, your gluten development should already be fine, so why are we even messing with the dough in the first place? Well, maybe there's a reason, but as usual, I love to test all the givens. If you're new to this channel, I bake a lot of sourdough bread and I make delicious food from all over the world. I'm on a quest to get the most out of every ingredient, and I want to teach you how to do that in simple and understandable steps. So join me by subscribing and ringing the bell so you won't miss any future videos. So I made a big batch of dough, about 3,200 grams. I let the flour and the water autolyse while the levain grow to double size. The dough is 75% hydration and has 20% freshly milled wheat. The other 80% is bread flour, also known as strong white flour. I've split the dough into 4 containers and I will work them separately. Then I'll shape them into boules and bake them, and we'll have a look at the crumb after they're cooled. Let's get a definitive answer if any of these techniques actually make a difference in the finished bread. My assumption is that we will probably get comparable results from all 4 techniques. First, I'll show you how I did it, and afterwards we'll look at the finished bread. Stick around for the conclusion. Let's get started. So I started by making the levain in the morning by mixing bread flour, freshly milled wheat, sourdough starter, and water, and I put it in my proofer, or as Joshua Weissman calls it, his fermentation station, set to 28 degrees Celsius or about 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Then I mixed all the flour, the water, and the salt in the recipe. Yes, I know, I'm a rebel. But I find that adding salt during autolyse makes it so much easier to mix later, and it doesn't really seem to change the dough before the bulk fermentation. When the starter had doubled, I mixed in the autolysed flour, and then I divided the dough into 4 equally sized pieces. And I put them in marked containers and let them rest for 30 minutes. So now the bulk has started, and we'll start the first set of agitations. We'll start with the one-handed Foodgeek patented stretch and fold. I start by making my hands wet. And then I loosen the dough from the container. Then with one hand I grab the back of the dough and I pull up while wiggling a bit. When it can't go any further, I fold the dough down towards myself. I then turn the container a quarter turn and repeat the procedure. I keep going until I've stretched and folded the dough from all 4 sides. Then we have the coil fold. The coil fold is a more gentle way of folding the dough. First I wet my hands. I know, dough is sticky and I really don't want to introduce any more flour. First I loosen the dough from the container. Then I grab the middle of the dough from the sides and I lift up the dough. As you can tell, it's really hard to do because the container is too light. Oh well, I worked around it. Then I pull one end under the middle of the dough. Then I lift up the other end and do the same. Then I turn the container a quarter turn and I repeat until I've folded 4 times in all. As you can see, it's much more gentle than the other methods. Then onto the regular stretch and fold. I loosen the dough from the container. And I grab the dough in the back with 2 hands and pull it up as far as it goes. Then I fold the flap that I pulled up in over the dough. Then I turn the container around and repeat the stretching and folding. Then I turn the container a quarter turn and stretch and fold again. And lastly, I turn the container around and I stretch and fold a last time. Then I put on the lid and go on to the next dough. Then the last one is what I call lazy man's dough. I don't have to wet my hands. I don't even have to take off the top. I just put it aside. Easy, huh? My usual strategy when working my sourdough-based doughs is to agitate 3 times, spaced out by 30 minutes. After I finish the last set, I do an assessment of the gluten development to see if more agitation is needed. I use the window pane test to see how strong the dough is. All these 4 doughs seem to be strong enough and have proper gluten development to go on. I then let them ferment on the counter until they've grown about 75%. Once the fermentation is over, I pre-shape them. Let's have a look at that. First, I pre-shaped the one that wasn't agitated at all. Next, it's the one-handed stretch and fold. Remember, Foodgeek patented? Then it's the regular stretch and fold. And lastly, it's the coil fold. Then I just let them sit on the counter for 30 minutes to relax the gluten. Then it's time to do the final shaping. I start with the lazy man's dough. It's pretty much collapsed, so that's not a great sign. Since I only have 3 bannetons, I will put this one directly in the oven. It's not looking too great. I'm sure a bit of a stay in the fridge would have helped this dough. Then I final shape the rest of the dough balls and put them in the fridge while the first one is baking. After the first one is done, I bake them one by one until they're all baked to perfection, which in my book means deeply caramelized. Now all there's left is to cut them in half so we can have a look at the crumb. Alright, so I worked the dough and I baked all the bread. First off, let me say that even though the gluten development was on par in every single container, the coil fold version seemed to hold together much better than the rest. It just stood up proud after the shaping where the others just kind of blopped out a bit. The one that wasn't agitated seemed the most slack. I know I baked that one straight after shaping, but I didn't have enough bannetons. I don't think it would have changed much either. So let's have a look at the crumb. We'll look at the non-agitated one first. It seems pretty compact and the crumb is so tight that it's bordering on gummy. It's not undercooked though. The crust is fine and crispy, no problem there. Next, the two-handed stretch and fold. The crumb is no more airy, but it's much softer. Then the one-handed stretch and fold dough seems to have a bit more airiness to it. The holes are a bit bigger, but probably not enough for it to be significant. The crumb is nice and soft too, and the crust is very crispy. I'd say there's really no difference between the crust in any of these breads. The last one is the coil folded one. As you can see, this one grew much larger. It seems to have more holes here and there. I guess the conclusion is that the coil folds are probably your best bet, but it's not like there's a huge difference and all of them produced fine bread. I'm definitely going to try and coil fold more in the future. I hope you learned something today. See you next time.